Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our panel discussion on making social media work for emergency responders. I'm Misty Kill, the Assistant Provost and Dean for the College of Safety and Emergency Services at Columbia Southern University in Orange Beach, Alabama, and I'm joined today by Professor Jeannie Reiner and Chief Keith Padgett. Both Jeannie and Keith have been in the emergency services field for a number of years, Jeannie taking more of a focus on EMS and Keith working in the fire service. All three of us have worked in the field throughout the time that social media was really taking hold and evolving to the way that we use it today. So we hope to offer our audience today some tips and best practices that we found helpful when using social media in emergency services. So to begin our discussion on social media, it's important for us all to be on the same page with regard to the many forms that social media can take. So for example, there are social networks. I think we're all familiar with these, things like Facebook or LinkedIn. There are bookmarking sites like Google Plus or Pinterest. There are social media sites like Reddit or Newsvine. Those are social news sites. There are media sharing sites like YouTube or Snapchat, and I think we're familiar with those with YouTube with the different videos. And microblogging sites such as Twitter, in addition to just general blogs where members can post comments and blogs on any particular question or topic. So there are a lot of options out there with regard to social media, and then to top it all off, some of these overlap in various ways, like for instance, how Facebook allows people to post videos and pictures and that sort of thing in addition to just the general posts. So with all these types of social media then, the question really becomes, how can those working in the safety field manage them all? And when we look at this as a whole, it can really be a bit daunting because we're talking about managing the information being shared with and from hundreds of thousands of users at any given time. But on the flip side of that, social media also offers us an amazing opportunity to reach all of these individuals with vital information with the touch of a button and with little to no cost to our budgets. So we'll talk about some case studies here in a moment that provide examples of situations that occurred in ways that social media was used. But before we get to that, I'd like to just get our audience sort of thinking a little about some easy ways that they can use social media in their agencies. So first, it's important to develop a social network page for our local emergency management agencies or safety agencies. And this allows community members to like or follow our pages and ensures that they're getting the information that we supply rather than possible false information from outside sources. We can also use things like hashtags to filter disaster-related information. So for example, some cities are now using disaster hashtags such as California fire or hashtag power outage to ensure that those looking for this information are able to find it much easier and faster. Many social media sites are now also using something called a pin drop feature, which allows those living in a disaster area to notify others that they're safe and accounted for in that area. We can also think about uploading helpful videos or to social networks and media sharing sites that explain preparedness techniques and provide information on an impending disaster. And this information can reach a really broad public and can be used in congruence with something like television or radio or other forms of media. And it can be used before a disaster occurs to get everyone on the same page ahead of time too. We could also use something called crowdsourcing, and that's a way to engage community members in the disaster preparedness activities that we might have happening in the local community area. So for example, we can start virtual conversation forums like blogs to obtain feedback from those in the community on disaster-related warning systems like sirens and other drills. And finally, it's also important to remember that social media not only allows us to share information quickly and easily, but it also allows us to gather information as well. So we can really do this in a variety of ways to see what information is out there from those in the disaster area. We can use social media to allow residents who need assistance to actually request it. We can use the pin drop feature, like I mentioned a moment ago, to locate those who may be missing. So there's really some easy and quick ways that you within your local community can start using social media without a heavy burden of cost. So The last thing that I'll mention here is that social media has become a huge part of emergency services, so much so that the Homeland Security Department's Science and Technology Directorate created a social media working group for emergency services and disaster management to provide those working in the field with some guidance on how to handle social media. The group received approval in February on the 22nd for its upcoming white paper, which is entitled Countering Misinformation, Rumors, and False Information on Social Media Before, During, and After Disasters and Emergencies. And that should actually be published very soon as well. So the report provides some goals for efforts to counter misinformation or rumors or false information when using social media, and I'm just going to mention a couple of them here quickly. So the group does recommend improving the quality of communication through double verification of information, so making sure that that information is accurate, removing uncertainty caused by misinformation, rumors, and false information, reducing the alert fatigue and the risk of a cry wolf type scenario, seeking ground truth as opposed to assumptions, which we all know is super important, being swift in releasing accurate information or acknowledging the situation to help the agency work with a network of truth amplifiers and establish credibility early on, and then determining the relevance of social media information. So a lot of it has to do with making sure that that information is accurate and timely. And then in order to achieve these, the group recommends using a virtual operations support team or some other form of digital volunteer to monitor social media and identify rumors and then report back to officials so that we can correct it. They also recommend actively tweeting and posting to correct misinformation or any kind of fake information. They recommend setting up a central website, which is kind of like a one-stop shop, again, to control rumors, and then pinning correct critical information to the top of the agency's Twitter feed or whatever social media form that you might be using. So I'll now hand it over to Jeannie to discuss some actual case studies that where we've used social media. And I would like to encourage our audience to keep these best practices that I just talked about in mind as we do further discuss some of this and consider ways that it could be used not only in these case studies but also in your local communities. So Jeannie, over to you.
Thanks, Misty, and good afternoon, everybody. It's Jeannie Reiner. I'm in the EMS side of things at Columbia Southern. My background originates in a southern coastal town on the East Coast. So when social media first entered the arena as a means of communicating with the public, the hurricane risk, by and large, consumed most of those efforts. Now, all of a sudden, you have the opportunity to get information to your general communities about things that they should do to pack a go bag, preparations they should make, supplies they should have on hand. It also provided an excellent educational tool to talk about the different categories of hurricanes, to share some information about what areas would be most vulnerable. And in general, it was a one-way street when it first started. So the local planning agencies, emergency managements, and what have you, they pushed the information out to the public. There wasn't a lot of engagement going on. Now, because that's where I started in the industry, I was a part of evacuation processes and planning prior to social media being available. Planning was very difficult. We had 2 back-to-back years with evacuations. The first one did not yield an actual hurricane event, and so only the vulnerable populations were removed from the area, evacuated inland, and that was primarily from inside the hospitals. The second evacuation was countywide for the most part, and it involved removing the medically fragile population from the community as well as the hospitals the border islands were completely evacuated, and the hospitals were evacuated almost entirely. All of the downtown city area, which also had a riverfront area, was evacuated. And so I was with the group that stayed behind. Communication was a challenge. There was really no one available to manage sharing of information, and yet there were still people who stayed behind. Fortunately, the area did not take a direct hit, and we just had some really heavy storms as the hurricane passed us by. It created a lot of confusion with the general population, repatriation. There really wasn't a lot of damage because the storms were not so significant that there were excessive problems, maybe some downed trees and such on the islands, but that would not necessarily be uncommon in a regular storm. So it was very difficult for the Emergency Management Agency and the public safety agencies to communicate to the citizenry why they were being forced to slowly crawl back into the area. Traffic jams were just horrible. Supplies were very low and hard to recover. And there just wasn't a great way to disseminate information at that particular time. And that really wasn't all that long ago. That was still in the early 2000s. So late 90s, early 2000s. So when social media became an option for communication, you can imagine that these agencies jumped all over it. I have to say I'm very proud of coming from an area where they took such an open approach. So now they were able to use social media to get out events where they handed out weather radios. They were able to put warnings up, and they really embraced social media across the board. So they have accounts in Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They are just making sure that they are able to reach out to the public in almost any way possible. And of course, they still continue with print ads and television and radio. But as society changes and where we go to look for information changes, then they recognized that they needed to address it through those avenues. So, hurricanes, old news. When we had to have an evacuation in the past couple of years, things went much smoother because there was a much easier line of communication. It also backfired just a little bit because those folks who didn't evacuate were posting pictures of what they considered to be minimal damage. And so the general population was not real happy that they couldn't get back in as timely as they wanted because there wasn't damage everywhere, but there was damage. So it's a double-edged sword. However, this past winter, that area that never sees winter weather, hardly ever, has, warm, sunny Christmases, and people keep their pools open nearly year-round, had a winter storm. Well, this was new information. So nobody was prepared for this. You almost can't find heavy-duty coats just anywhere in that particular area. So these were people who were already kind of skeptical. They hadn't seen snow in decades, and they just didn't really expect anything to come of it. A lot of false alarms over the years. However, the Emergency Management Agency, they take it seriously, so they started sending out notifications about pending weather conditions 48 to 72 hours out. They would send things like, it looks like Jack Frost is joining us in the new year. Protect your people, pets, plants, and pipes, because obviously the plants down there aren't really used to cold weather either. The pets certainly aren't. And people don't wrap their pipes the way they do in areas that routinely have exposure to cold. So those were big things to get out there. There's also a fairly significant homeless population. And so they want to make sure that people, are looking out for one another. They also then sent out some reminders. So they put out on their social media what things you needed to do to make sure that you were prepared for this weather that you're not normally accustomed to. And they took into account things like making sure you have plans if school is canceled, because that is not a common thing for some folks to have to work and kids be home alone. Making sure that your gas tank is full and that you check on things like your mobile devices, make sure you have charging capability, freezing bottles of water in case you lose power, and then making plans to stay in and stay safe. Things that we talk about in areas that might have exposure to cold weather or cold precipitation more commonly, like limiting travel, working from home if that's a possibility. But still, they weren't really convinced that this winter storm was coming. They were sharing resources available through the state's emergency management agency, but they just weren't sure. Then they started sharing the forecast, and they would put pictures from the National Weather Service up on the social media sites, and it would have things like expected snowfall. And again, I think most people in this area still thought, nah, it's not going to happen. We just don't get that stuff down here. But 12 to 24 hours out, they were really pouring in the warnings. They wanted to make sure folks understood that there could be winter precipitation, there could be freezing rain, there could be a risk when traveling, and that flooding was a possibility as well, flooding being a fairly common problem in that area. They also wanted to make sure that before you were sort of sequestering yourself inside in preparation for the storm, that you ensured you had those must-have items. They did not post any memes of empty bread and toilet paper, but lots of folks that I worked with over the years definitely shared those photos on social media. They posted the must-have type items, making sure that you have enough of your prescriptions, making sure that you have flashlights and first aid kits and maybe some extra blankets in case you didn't have warm winter coats, considering some additional heating sources, and then making sure that the car had things like jumper cables, getting some sand or cat litter because they don't really keep ice melt down there, an ice scraper, some mobile chargers for your phone. Just in case the power's out, you might be able to charge your mobile devices with your car. And again, not to travel without food, water, and blankets in the car in case you have difficulty while on the road. Once they did that, they just kept updating folks, winter weather is coming. Then they put out some stuff about, what are some potential impacts if we get snow or if we get ice or if the wind chill is particularly cold. And then they situated that in the prediction, like when that was expected to occur in the area. And these are really vibrant colors. They're going out to all age groups. They're easy to be shared. You can retweet. You can share, repost, those kinds of things. Take a picture of it, post it up on Instagram on your own accounts. But it provided some education about what to expect. And then they talked a little more about safety. Fortunately, our state emergency management group has compiled terrific resources for all types of hazards and emergencies that your communities might encounter. So they didn't have to invent any of this stuff. It was available for them to use. Because the northern part of the state does have some precipitation in the winter weather sometimes. They talked about things that you need to take into consideration if you're going to use generators or any kind of camp stoves and grills. A grill with full gas tanks come in real handy when you lose power. So those are the types of things that they wanted to make sure the public was aware of. And then as the storm arrived, they started sharing things such as impact statements, closed roads, bridges that were too icy for people to travel on, and then any school closings and business closings and that kind of thing, and they just maintained that real-time update. Additionally, like I mentioned before, this is not just an outbound communication with the community, but it also allows the community to share information back, share pictures of conditions in various areas, and share information with those who may not have the ability to access it, or if you were planning to drive to your job in a certain area of the county, then maybe you could see pictures of what conditions look like, and you might say, yeah, not thinking I'm going to make that. But it's really good to have that ability to communicate back into. Now, I'm sure that there is a certain amount of screening that occurs so that you don't have inappropriate comments being posted or inappropriate pictures. But for the most part, everything stayed pretty live time. And then they took a lot of questions. You could see that there were tons of questions with most any of the updates that were posted on Facebook and Instagram and that kind of thing. I think that pretty much covers the use of the social media in terms of a case study. It was a real eye-opening experience for them. Like I said, most people it had become the norm to see, those same precautions during hurricane season, May through November. So you were just used to those, the preparation stage and then the hurricane risk stage. So folks already were aware of what they could access to get information that was real and current. And so when the winter weather occurred, the community was prepared and knew where to go to get the information. So social media made a huge impact on how well that worked out for the community. So the next person that's going to share some information is Chief Padgett. So I'm going to turn things over to him.
Hello, everyone. I'm Keith Padgett, the Fire and EMS Academic Program Director here at Columbia Southern University. It's great to be here with you today. As we look at the slide and we talk about social media, it always amazes me that there are so many people that utilize social media to obtain their information. As you can see on the slide, the numbers are enormous. I was really kind of surprised to see YouTube was such a strong second behind Facebook. I normally don't consider YouTube as popular as Instagram or Twitter. However, it's in front of Instagram and Twitter, and then front page, what is considered the front page of the internet, Reddit, is right behind it. There's a picture that's floating around showing that a group of people on the subway from the 1960s, and all of them had a newspaper up in front of them. And as they're moving along through the train, you look down and you see that everyone is obtaining their information through that newspaper. And then there's right below it, there's a picture in 2018 of everyone looking at their phones. And where they're gathering information, it might be through social media, or they might be looking at different websites. It's how they obtain their information, and it's always available 24/7. And when they have that little bit of downtime, what do? They pick up their phone and they begin to look at it, Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Maybe a couple of specific accounts, and hopefully it might be your fire department. Dr. Keel and Jenny have covered an extensive amount of information so far on social media and provided great examples on what and how to get that information out. However, the community must know where to go, what account to access to get the latest, most accurate information. So there must be some groundwork laid before anything. The foundation of your account or accounts must be there long before the emergency event happens. You must become that go-to account. Years ago, the local newspaper would be delivered to my firehouse that I was assigned to. Quite often, I would look forward to the paper being thrown out of the ramp and immediately walk out there and get it, because we wanted and anticipate that means of getting the information, the most current information, which could have been days or hours old at that time. However, it was our go-to place to get that information. We could count on that the newspaper was going to be delivered every day, every morning around 7 or 7:30 a.m., it would hit the ramp. And if it was not there by 8 o'clock, we called the office of the local newspaper and asked them where it was at. Imagine if the only time that paper was delivered was the day of an emergency event or anticipated severe weather. Would we have even known to look for that paper? With all that said, it's important to be active on your social media accounts. Be that or become that go-to account for all types of information that related to your department. Don't wait for that emergency event and start posting, but actively have the presence in your community. I cannot stress how important it is to establish your social media account as a stakeholder in your community. One way to accomplish this is to build that strong relationship or partnership with other organizations in your local city, town, or district or county. An example is have that relationship with your emergency management agency or EMS department or local law enforcement. However, don't forget to also build those relationships with organizations like the Red Cross or local community groups or clubs. Share their posts to assist them to get their information out. It might be a smoke detector blitz in your community sponsored by the Red Cross. Share that information to get the information out. They will start sharing your information in return to help you get anything that you might have out. It really boils down to good public relations, and social media is an excellent vehicle for that. Let's briefly talk about fire prevention and safety in social media. It presents a tremendous opportunity to get different types of key messages out. One of the areas that I love to go to is the U.S. Fire Administration's social media toolkit. There is all types of videos, pre-created posts that you can put out. There's hashtags that are there for like cooking safety, fire safety, older adult safety and children. There's just all types of information that's free and readily available. The one last thing I want to talk about is a social management platform, and to utilize one of those, it might be Hootsuite or TweetDeck or HubSpot, just one of those that you can link all of your social media accounts to one of those social management platforms, and when you hit the button, you're sending it across multiple social media accounts. That kind of wraps it up for me. Again, I want to thank everyone for coming out and listening today. We look forward to doing another presentation. And please visit our website at columbiasouthern.edu. You can follow me at CSUFire. Again, it's at CSUFire. Next up is our question and answer session, so please stick around. We'd love to hear more from you.
All right. Thank you, Chief. So we'll now open it up to questions from our audience. Please do be aware, too, that if we don't get to your questions during the time that we have here, you can always reach out to us via the contact information that's provided on this slide. So please go ahead and ask any questions that you might have. All right, so we do have a question here about apps. And so when we're using apps and we're doing messaging, there's a different, you can either do in-app messaging or you can do push notifications. And so I think what we're talking about here is push notifications. They allow you to sort of deliver the message to the user's home screen, kind of like a text message. So users of the app do have to allow for those. But when they're used, they can be really effective as long as you think about three main things. You got to think about the content, the frequency, and the timing. So you don't want to misuse them because they can be very irritating, and people, you know, if you use them too much, it's, you know, kind of that cry wolf thing where people will just kind of swipe them away and they're not really paying attention. to what information you're providing. So just make sure that when they're used, they are very direct and specific so people aren't left with questions. So really great question. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dr. Kill. I see that Elizabeth has asked about when it comes to fire departments with little or no social media experience, what do you recommend? Elizabeth, I believe it's, as I said in the presentation, just go ahead and start a Twitter account for your department. Make sure that all of the personnel know that that is the official Twitter account or a Facebook page for the organization, and then begin to post something as simple as I mentioned earlier, something from the NFA, the National Fire Academy, or the U.S. Fire Administration. You can go to the National Fire Protection Association, their Twitter account, and retweet. If nothing else, you're getting fire safety information out, and you will become known in the local community as that. Of course, you'll reach out and start to begin to follow. It might be EMA or law enforcement, some of the local businesses or key information sites in that community. I've found that there will be groups, informal groups in the local area, your town or city, that will have just kind of a general information site that they'll post and people will follow. It's almost like, for lack of a better term, kind of a gossip page. But they will, once you start posting and link to that gossip page, they'll realize that you are the person to go to as an emergency provider, and where the most current information can come from. Elizabeth, thanks for your question. Dr. Kill, back to you.
Thanks so much. I think we have another one here that Jeannie is going to take.
Thanks, Dr. Kill. I see that Cherry posted a question about how many posts or tweets per day would you recommend. I don't think that there is a specific answer to that question that's right or wrong, Cherry. I know that during the event, most people want as much information as you can push at them. I also think it depends on your department's infrastructure. Do you have someone who can push those posts and tweets out regularly? In the EMA that I worked with, there was an individual assigned to social media, and during events, that was their, I don't want to say key role, they had other roles, but that was one of the things they stayed on top of. They also worked very closely with the local weather stations for TV and radio. So they tried really hard to keep the information current to them as well for people who are still getting their information via TV or radio. But during the event, unless they are consumed with something that takes a higher priority, I don't think that there is a right or wrong amount. I hope that answers your question. I'm going to turn it back over to Keith.
Thanks, Jenny. I see that Evan has a question about how do you get buy-in from your fire chief? Evan, I would go to the chief and let him or her know that it's a priority for the organization, for the department, to get that information out to the public. And again, I cannot stress enough that just get fire prevention information out initially, just to get some type of presence on the web, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, and then you can post pictures of your department training, doing some type of hose evolutions or ladder raises or EMS training, just so they see that you are a key player and stakeholder in their community and not just some agency that they never see. I'm telling you, it will make a difference. When I would go to like homeowners association meetings and they would see me, they would say, "Hey, I saw you on Twitter. Really saw it might be a large fire or a motor vehicle accident that we had. that we posted some information, as Dr. Kill had said the other earlier in the presentation, about maybe avoiding that area. There might be something that we post to say that there was a motor vehicle crash at the intersection of I-85 and Flat Shoals Road. And then people would go to that and realize that they needed to avoid that area. But when we would go to those homeowners association meetings, they said, we follow you all the time. We've got a notification that comes up. So when that information comes out, they just know that that's the place to come. Now, with that, take that information, take examples to your fire chief from larger departments or local departments, and show that it does have a positive impact. Okay, Evan, I hope that answered your question. And there's one more I saw from Gina. Gina asked about buy-in from all personnel. Gina, I believe that's the same way. Get in there and show them what a positive impact that it has in the community. It's all about serving the public and not just responding to emergencies. Smoke detector blitz in the community, installing smoke detectors, doing blood pressure checks, anything like that at local senior citizen centers, or even going to elementary schools and serving lunch. I know that sounds kind of corny sometimes, but people love to see their fire department. And I truly believe that it's a good thing when you go to those meetings and they refer to your organization as their fire department. So, Gina, I hope that answers your question, and thanks for participating today. Dr. Keel, do you want to answer one of the questions now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I have one here from Elizabeth, and she asks which best practice is most important when it comes to emergency services management in dealing with a natural disaster. And I have a couple, so I'm not just going to limit this to one, but my first best practice, of course, would be to make a page. So whatever social media platform that you're wanting to choose, it's really important to make a page for your agency. Make sure that it's the official page so that people know they can they can follow you, and they know that the information they're getting there is the accurate information. And it's not the hearsay stuff that, maybe some local citizens might be posting. So I would say that would be the first step. The second best practice would be to be sure to provide very direct and detailed information when it is needed. Do not overpost, because again, just like with that app question, with the push notifications, if you make too many posts, people will stop looking at it. So post the information that's very direct, very detailed, and timely, but do not overpost. The other thing you can do is pin the really important stuff to the top of the page so that it remains at the top of the page, the post, whatever the information is that you're sharing, so that when people come to the page, that's the first thing that they're going to be seeing is the most important information. So I would say if I had to choose, well, that was two best practices, but if I had to choose two things, those would be my absolute two most important starting points.
Hi.
We have.
I noticed. Sorry, Keith.
Go ahead, Jenny. That's fine.
I saw there was a question from Chris about using a social media management platform. I don't have a recommendation. I haven't seen anything that supports that necessarily. I think it probably depends on how many social media outlets you're trying to manage and how much manpower you have to do that. I will tell you that I don't believe they were using that in the area that I'm from, because while they were pushing messages out, they weren't always pushing the same message across each platform. I tend to think that the age groups of who accesses these social media platforms differs just a little bit. And so I think that the message was, if you looked at how it compared across the board, because when I was preparing the slide, I went back and looked at the different outlets to see what they shared, and it was just a little bit different. Hootsuite is a good tool for social management, but again, I think it also depends on how far along you are in your process. And that sort of tied into a question that I also saw with regards to Evan, where there's only one person with access to the department's Facebook page. I will tell you that anything that you have just one single person that can do is always a bad practice in my experience, because if you get hit by the bus, somebody has to be able to take that over. And social media is pretty close to a lockdown type situation, so that it's very hard to get people access if you don't have that going in when you set it up. So it's always a good idea to have a secondary person. And it is beneficial to post information after the fact, but the real key thing is to try to find some way to get it as current as possible. And I think once you get started, you just sort of fall into a habit, if you will, of getting the information a little more or closer to live time. So I'll turn it back over to Misty. I think she had a couple of questions she wanted to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeannie. So I see another post here, or a question here from John, which is it's an excellent question. I really want to share this with everyone. He says, in a county where there are several agencies operating, would you suggest collaborating and pushing the same types of messages to the public? I would absolutely recommend that. I think that coordinating with all the agencies to be sure that the information that's released is accurate, of course, timely, of course, but also that there aren't conflicting messages happening. We've seen that in the past. We've seen things with differing jurisdictions. They post different things. It's super important to have that network, that collaboration between agencies, and for everyone to really work together to be sure that the message that's pushed out to the public is the right message and that it's going to work for everyone. I know that some things that might happen with fire might not work with EMS, might not work with the EMA, might not work for the hospital. There's lots of moving factors there. So it's important for us all to get together and make sure that the message we're providing is the best message that we can give to the community, and be sure that all of our stakeholders know what's happening. Let's see here. So thank you very much for that question, John. That's a really good point that I wanted to share with everyone. And I believe that Chief Paget, is there another question for you?
Well, yeah, I think Jenny and I are going to tag team on this. There was a question about, let me pull it up again, that the department had a young boy was in cardiac arrest at 11 weeks, and that the parent was thankful of the help her son received, and he was present at one of the Pub Ed events, and is now 3 years old. And they were wondering about would there be a conflict with HIPAA. I would not post something directly immediately from your account that way. However, if the mom or parent, the mother or father, wants to put in their Twitter account how happy they were by the response and the service and the medical attention that was provided to their son, I think you can retweet that easily because they're basically giving you the permission. I know there's a lot of concern. Jenny, what's your thoughts on that? Because it's always good to champion how our members do on a call. So again, Jenny, what's your thoughts?
Well, it ties into the question that Evan also shared about protecting sensitive information. And coming from the ambulance side, that's just our nature to try to protect patient information. But we actually have had some patients who've come back after the fact. And one of the things that we do, especially if we're going to have like a picture, is we make sure that the person is in the picture. So we incorporate them into the post. They're readily visible. It's obvious it was not taken without their consent. There's no picture of the patient only. There's no picture of scenes and that kind of thing. And then we have a very strong policy that, they're not allowed to take pictures and things when they're on live scenes. But we do have after the fact, and we always try to have it like they'll stop by the station, so we just put them in the picture with us, sort of an implied consent by doing that.
Jenny, that's a great point, and I want to say this because we do go to elementary schools, and do a lot of public education, child safety and teaching. And, of course, we take the fire trucks, and the kids want to climb in, and teachers sometimes will take pictures. We are kind of reluctant to post those pictures with the kids unless we get that approval. Because in the past, I have heard the stories of some parents do not want their child to be posted on social media. So I think you hit a really good point to be cautious unless you receive approval from a parent or a guardian. Okay. Dr. Kill, is there another one that you see that you would like to answer at the moment?
Well, actually, Chief, that's actually our time for today. So it went really quickly. We greatly appreciate the time everyone on the call took. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for your questions. If you still have any remaining questions, please feel free to give us a shout out on Twitter. I believe that all of our handles are posted for you. So please feel free to reach out to us there. And if there's anything else that you need, you can always reach out to us via email as well. I believe our emails were shared in the presentation. So we greatly appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you on a future webinar.